Hi everyone, today's story is called The Flaming Bond. Relax and enjoy. Chapter 1. The Bond That Burns. The forest thrummed with hunger and moonlight. Every tree seemed to whisper as the wind coiled through the branches like smoke. Shadows danced silver-black across the snow, and the ground quivered with the heartbeat of predators. Nyra moved at the center of it all. Her wolves followed in reverent silence, muscle and menace on 4 legs, their eyes glowing like shards of molten gold. She walked before them in her wolf form, her fur black as midnight, her stride powerful, her presence undeniable. When she shifted at the edge of the clearing, the night itself seemed to pause. Fur melted into flesh, and the great beast became a woman, a vision carved from onyx and fire. Her skin gleamed deep and flawless in the moonlight, smooth as obsidian kissed by silver. Her body was power and temptation entwined, her curves unapologetic, her strength written in every line. Coiled locks tumbled down her back, adorned with beads of bone and moonstone. Nyra stood bare against the wind, proud and unbroken. She was the storm that broke chains, the huntress that devoured kings. And yet, tonight, her heart raced for a reason that made her want to tear the stars from the sky. The mate bond had snapped into place that morning, unbidden, merciless. It had struck her like lightning, a burn in her veins that no battle could quench, a tether pulling tight between her soul and another. She had fought wars, faced death, crushed rivals, but nothing terrified her like this. She didn't even know who he was. The summit of Alpha's was held in a hall carved into the bones of a mountain, stone walls etched with runes older than memory, torches burning blue fire along the perimeter. Every faction had gathered, wolves, sleek and restless, tigers with eyes like molten copper, towering bears, their voices deep as thunder, the hawkkin, silent and sharp as blades. And now, the wolves of Silverfang entered. Nyra walked between her warriors like a queen adorned in shadows and steel. A cloak of midnight swept behind her, silver runes glimmering faintly along its hem. Heads turned. Voices faltered. Power rolled off her like heat from a forge. And then she scented him. The world stopped. Smoke. Iron. Frost. Her heart slammed against her ribs as her wolf surged, howling inside her chest. Her gaze found him across the hall, tall, broad-shouldered, a predator draped in arrogance. His hair was dark as midnight, his jaw carved in stone, his eyes sharp and cold as tempered steel. Alpha Kael of Iron Claw. The bond burned white-hot between them. Nyra's breath caught. Her wolf clawed at her ribs, snarling for him, for the mate fate had chosen. Her skin tingled, her pulse wild. And then he looked at her. Slowly. His gaze slid down her body, over the swell of her hips, the strength in her thighs, the curves she carried like a crown. And his mouth twisted. "You?" he said softly, voice sharp enough to cut. The words tasted like ash on her tongue. Kael let his gaze linger one last time, disdain dripping from every flicker of his eyes, and then he added, so quietly only she heard, "You're not what I imagined. I wanted someone leaner, stronger. I reject you as my mate." Then he turned away. Nyra stood frozen. The hall buzzed around her, politics, alliances, whispered threats, but all she heard was the echo of his voice. All she felt was the raw, gaping wound where something sacred had just shattered. Nyra's jaw clenched so hard it ached. Heat surged through her veins, rage, humiliation, and something darker she refused to name. Her wolf strained against the cage of her ribs, ready to lunge across the hall and rip his throat out. But queens didn't bleed in public. And they damn sure didn't beg. Slowly, deliberately, she rolled her shoulders back and lifted her chin. If Kael thought rejection would break her, he would learn what happened to those who underestimated her. Alpha Nyra, a voice called, smooth, melodic, and steeped in fey charm. The summit's moderator, an ancient fey elder draped in shimmering silk, gestured toward the obsidian throne at the head of the circle. "The council awaits you." Every gaze followed her as she walked through the gathering hall. Her steps were measured, her cloak whispering against the stone floor like the promise of a storm. Whispers rippled in her wake. Silver Fang's queen. She's even stronger than they say. And unbonded. The last one was a dagger, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a slow, lethal curve of lips that made lesser alphas look away. She sat on the throne of black stone, carved with runes of her ancestors. It rose higher than any other seat in the circle. Power wasn't just hers, it was her birthright, reforged in blood and fire. Across the chamber, Kael took his place among the iron-claw wolves. He didn't look at her again. Coward. The Fey elder lifted his hands for silence. We convene the Alpha Summit to discuss borders, treaties, and the trials to come. His voice echoed like wind through a crypt. Speak, leaders of the wild. And so began the endless parade of speeches, territorial disputes, trade routes, alliances forged in desperation. Nyra listened with half an ear, her mind a storm. Every heartbeat was a war drum. Every inhale tasted of smoke and steel, Kael's scent, relentless, mocking her. The bond burned inside her like a brand. It should have been a blessing. Fated mates were rare, sacred. The gods themselves wove the thread. And yet, here she was, tethered to a male who had looked at her and seen. What? Less. A low growl coiled in her throat, too soft for mortal ears, but her beta caught it. Riven sat at her right, silver hair braided tight against his head, amber eyes sharp as knives. He leaned in, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. What did he say to you? Nyra's nails dug crescents into the arm of her throne. Nothing worth repeating. Riven's jaw flexed. His neck would look good in my teeth. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. Stand in line. The council droned on. Nyra forced herself to focus, to drown the ache with power. She was Silverfang's queen. Her pack survival didn't hinge on a man's approval. Later, in the Silverfang stronghold's private chambers, Nyra stood before a mirror of black glass, stripped of her cloak and armor, wearing only a thin slip of silk that clung to her curves like smoke. She stared at herself. At the curve of her hips, the strength in her thighs, the power in her shoulders. At the scars, a map of battles survived, of wars won. She was a queen forged in blood. A body carved from survival. And yet, Kael's words crawled like poison through her mind. Leaner. Stronger. A soft knock at the door. Riven entered without waiting for permission. He never needed it. He carried 2 goblets and a bottle of amber liquid that smelled of fire and oak. You're brooding, he said, setting the drinks down. I hate when you brood. Nyra arched a brow. Then leave. Not a chance. He handed her a goblet. Drink before you bite someone. She took it, the burn of whiskey sharp against her tongue. Silence stretched, heavy as chains. Finally, she murmured, he looked at me like I was weak. Riven's eyes flashed. He's a fool. And fools die early. Nyra laughed softly. Bitter, beautiful. Why does it still hurt? Because you're not made of ice, Riven said. You have a heart, so of course you'll feel something. His words slid into her bones like steel. She drained the goblet, set it down, and let her gaze harden. Chapter 2. The Weight of a Throne. The mountain winds keened like morning spirits as dawn crawled over the frozen peaks. Nyra stood on her balcony, the chill biting at her bare skin, though she felt nothing. The cold could not touch her, not when the fire in her chest roared hotter than any winter storm. Below, the Silverfang wolves trained in the courtyard, their howls splitting the morning air. Blades clashed, muscles strained, snow churned into mud beneath pounding feet. Her pack, the strongest in the north. Her pride. Her crown. And yet, fate had tried to make her small last night. The bond still thrummed faintly inside her, a tether that felt more like a chokehold. The gods had woven her thread to his, and Kael had cut it with a single glance. Rejection didn't always sever the bond immediately. Sometimes it lingered like a dying ember. This one burned stubborn, refusing to die clean. Nyra curled her hands on the stone railing until her knuckles whitened. Behind her, the door creaked. Riven-scent hit first, pine, steel, and loyalty. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, his amber eyes studying her with the weight of someone who had seen too much. "They're already gathering," he said. "Council resumes in an hour." Nyra didn't turn. "Let them wait." "Careful, Alpha," Riven murmured. "You keep making them nervous. They'll start plotting." She smirked without warmth. "Let them plot. They'll choke on their own blood before they take my throne." He pushed off the doorframe, stepping closer. "You're still thinking about him." Nyra's jaw flexed. "No. Liar." She spun then, eyes flashing molten gold, power flaring so sharp the braziers guttered. "I do not need him. I do not need anyone." Riven's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good. Because Kael's going to learn that today." The Alpha Council chamber was an amphitheater carved from black stone and bone, its floor etched with glowing runes. Wolves from every pack circled the obsidian table, their auras heavy with dominance. Shifters of other breeds occupied the outer tiers, sleek tiger lords draped in silk, bear chiefs like living mountains, avian emissaries with feathers braided into their hair. And at the head of the circle sat Nyra. No crown adorned her locks. She didn't need one. Power draped her shoulders like velvet, and when she leaned back in her throne, the entire chamber felt her weight. Kael entered late. He strode through the archway like he owned the hall, his warriors flanking him in polished leather and steel. Conversation faltered. Nyra watched him from beneath her lashes, every muscle taut. He didn't look at her, didn't even glance, but the scent of his pride was thick, cloying. He took his seat, jaw tight, and only then did his gaze flick toward the throne. His eyes froze. Recognition slammed into him like a blade. Because last night, when he dismissed her with those cutting words, he hadn't known. He hadn't realized that the woman he'd deemed unworthy was the Queen of Silverfang, the most feared alpha on the continent. And now, the truth gutted him. Nyra let silence stretch, coiling like a predator ready to strike. When she finally spoke, her voice was velvet over steel. "Alpha Kael," she purred. "So good of you to join us." The chamber hummed with tension. Kael inclined his head stiffly. "Queen Nyra." Her smile was slow, dangerous. "I wasn't aware you knew my name. After all, last night you seemed unaware of many things." A ripple of laughter slithered through the ranks. Kael's jaw clenched so hard Nyra almost heard his teeth crack. The Fey elder cleared his throat, voice echoing magically. "The First Order of Business, territorial claims. Silverfang asserts sovereignty over the northern ridge. Ironclaw contests the claim." Kael seized the lifeline. The ridge was neutral land. Silverfang expanded without council approval. Nyra rose from her throne. The movement was deliberate, slow, lethal. Her cloak whispered across the floor like a blade unsheathed. "I don't need approval," she said, voice low but thrumming with power. "I need strength, and my pack has it." Gasps fluttered like wings. Kael surged to his feet, bristling. "Tradition." "Tradition," Nyra cut in, stalking down the steps, "is for those who fear change. I built my empire from ash and bone. I claimed that land because no one else could hold it. And if you think you can take it from me—" She leaned in, close enough for him to feel her heat, her voice a razor against his pride. "Try." The silence that followed was a living thing. Kael's eyes burned into hers, cold and furious, but beneath the rage lurked something else. Something raw. Something hungry. It made her want to tear his throat out and laugh while he bled. The elder raised a trembling hand. Vote, then. All in favor of Silverfang retaining the ridge. Hands rose, one by one, until Kael was alone in his dissent. Nyra smiled like a wolf showing teeth. Motion carried. The elder croaked. Silverfang retains sovereignty. Nyra turned her back on Kael and ascended to her throne. The ultimate insult. She didn't see his fists clench white, didn't see the storm gathering in his eyes. But she felt it, and for the first time since last night, she welcomed the burn. That night, the halls of the stronghold pulsed with whispers long after the council adjourned. Did you see her humiliate him? She made Ironclaw kneel without lifting a blade. She's untouchable. Nyra stood on her balcony again, the wind howling through her locks, the moon staining her skin silver. Below, her wolves trained by torchlight, howls tearing through the night. But her thoughts weren't on them. They were on Kael. On the way his pride had shattered like glass. On the way his eyes had burned, not just with fury, but with something he didn't want to admit. Desire. Her wolf stirred at the thought, snarling in dark delight. But before the lingering hunger of the fading bond could take root, another sound stirred in the night. A roar. Deep. Resonant. Ancient. The mountains trembled beneath its echo. Nyra's breath caught, and shiver ran down her spine. Something was coming. Chapter 3 Blood on Snow. The night split open with screams. Nyra was already moving when the first howl shattered the stillness. She tore through the stronghold gates in wolf form, black fur rippling like a living shadow, claws gouging deep into the frost. The wind carried the stench of rogues, feral wolves twisted by desperation and madness. Her lips peeled back, a snarl ripping from her throat. The ridge. They'd come for the ridge. Her pack surged behind her, a river of muscle and teeth, their howls a war song that shook the peaks. Snow churned beneath their paws as they hurtled toward the northern border, where the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the bleeding moon. The rogues were waiting. 20 of them, maybe more lean savage things with eyes like coals and foam dripping from their jaws. Hunger made them reckless. Rage made them bold. But nothing could make them ready for her. Nyra slammed into the first wolf like a storm given flesh. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed hot against the snow. Her claws ripped, her teeth tore, her fury painting the ground crimson. She moved like death on 4 legs, fast, merciless, unrelenting. One rogue lunged for her flank. She spun mid-air, jaws snapping, and tore his throat out in a single savage bite. Another tried to flee. Her howl froze him where he stood. By the time her pack caught up, the ground was littered with bodies. Steam curled from the crimson snow. Nyra stood over the last rogue, her paw crushing his skull into the ice. When she shifted, it was like watching the moon eclipse the sun. Fur melted into flesh, revealing a woman drenched in blood and glory, her hair wild with frost, her muscles slick with the heat of battle. Her skin gleamed like polished mahogany under the torn clouds. She stood naked in the snow, her chest heaving, her eyes molten gold. And she smiled. Slow. Dangerous. Because death was the only language these fools understood, and she had spoken it fluently. Later. Steam rose from the baths like ghosts, the scent of cedar and smoke curling through the chamber. Nyra sat half-submerged in the pool, her locks coiled at the nape of her neck, her skin gleaming wet and dark under the glow of rune lights. Blood had long since been scrubbed away, but the kill still thrummed in her bones, a wild drumbeat she couldn't silence. The water rippled. Nyra's head snapped up, a growl rumbling low in her throat. Kael stepped from the shadows. He was bare to the waist, snow melting in rivulets over his scars, his muscles carved in cruel perfection. His gray eyes burned, not cold now, but molten, storm-tossed and raw. His wolf prowled beneath his skin, hungry. What do you want? Nyra's voice was smoke over steel. Kael didn't answer. He stalked closer, boots thudding against stone, the heat of him cutting through the steam as if the bath belonged to him. Nyra rose slowly from the water, unhurried, glorious, bare as a blade. Droplets traced the curve of her hips, the strength of her thighs, the power in every line of her body. She didn't cover herself. She didn't bow. Kael's breath hitched. You shouldn't be here, she said, stepping toward him, her wet skin glistening like moonlit obsidian. He swallowed hard. You're mine. The words cracked through the air like thunder. Nyra laughed. Low, dark, beautiful. You said you wanted someone leaner, stronger. His jaw clenched. I was wrong. She circled him now, predator slow, her voice a blade sliding into flesh. You don't get to want me now. Nyra, his hand shot out, fingers closing around her wrist. Her wolf surged, power lashing like a storm. In a blur, she wrenched free, slammed him against the stone wall with a snarl that rattled the air. Her claws kissed his throat, not breaking skin, yet. Touch me again, she whispered, lips brushing his ear, and I'll tear your hand off. Kael's breath came ragged with desire. Gods! He rasped, eyes devouring her. You're serious about ripping your hand off, she cut in, stepping back, her power coiling like smoke around her. Remember that, and pray you never forget it. She turned, water cascading from her skin, her hips swaying like a promise and a threat. Kael stood frozen, chest heaving, the ghost of her claws burning against his throat. And for the first time, the mighty alpha of Iron Claw understood. He hadn't rejected weakness. He had rejected ruin. Chapter 4. Under the Blood Moon. The mountains bled red under the rising moon. Nyra stood at the edge of the sacred glade, the wind coiling cold fingers through her braids as the night thrummed with ancient power. Torches burned blue fire along the rune-carved stones, casting jagged shadows over the circle where legends were made, or broken. The Blood Moon Trials. Every century, the gods demanded tribute in strength, cunning, and spirit. Every alpha who ruled by fang and claw came to bleed for their throne. Failure meant disgrace, death, or worse, submission. Nyra had no intention of failing. She adjusted the leather harness biting into her curves, the runes etched into the black straps glowing faintly in the crimson light. The air reeked of dominance, wolves, tigers, bears, even the panther queen whose smile promised ruin. But the weight of the stairs pressed hardest from across the circle. Kael. He stood wreathed in shadow, his silver iron gaze fixed on her like a blade. There was no cold indifference now, only hunger and rage tangled into something raw. Last night had stripped his pride and left it bleeding on the floor. Today he wanted retribution. Nyra almost laughed. Trial 1. Strength. The elder's voice rolled like thunder, shattering the hush. The first trial begins. The earth groaned. The glade split open, belching smoke and fire. From the maw crawled nightmares, beasts of horn and fang, their hides glistening with dark magic. Dire wolves the size of horses. Serpents plated in iron. Bears crowned in bone. The alphas scattered like sparks in the wind. Nyra did not move. She waited, breath slow, pulse steady, as the ground shook under a horned wolf with molten eyes. It charged, snarling, earth splintering beneath its claws. She met it head-on. Flesh melted to fur mid-stride, her form exploding into a storm of muscle and shadow. The collision cracked the stones. They rolled, a cyclone of blood and fury, teeth sinking, claws rending, magic searing the air. Pain licked her ribs. She welcomed it. It sharpened her. When the beast lunged for her throat, she twisted, jaws snapping, ripping half its face away. Its scream split the sky before she crushed its skull beneath her paw. Silence. Then a howl ripped from her chest, wild, victorious, thunder rolling through bone and blood. Wolves on the outer tiers dropped their gazes. Even the tiger lords stilled. When she shifted back, she stood drenched in crimson, her body gleaming with sweat and gore, her chest heaving like a war drum. Her smile was the promise of storms. Across the circle, Kael's eyes burned. Trial 2. Cunning. The glade transformed. Stone shattered, revealing a labyrinth carved into the mountain's heart, a maze of shifting walls and burning runes, filled with illusions that broke minds before bones. The token lies at the center, the elder intoned. Return with it, or not at all. The air warped, heavy with enchantment. Nyra stepped inside. Shadows slithered. Whispers coiled around her like smoke. Voices of the dead, of lovers, of monsters wearing familiar faces. Her wolf prowled beneath her skin, snarling at the illusions clawing at her mind. Kael's voice slithered through the dark. You're not enough, Nyra. You never were. She bared her teeth. Try harder. She moved like a phantom, slipping past traps that turned others into screaming wreckage. Twice, the walls shifted to crush her. Twice, she shattered them with her claws. When she reached the center, the token, a silver dagger etched in blood runes, floated in the air. She seized it, sliced her palm, let her blood hiss against the blade. And the labyrinth bowed. When she emerged, other alphas staggered behind her, bleeding, broken, empty-handed. Kael stumbled out last, his aura crackling with fury, his pride carved hollow. Nyra didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The sanctum was carved into the mountain's ribs, glowing with veins of molten stone. Nyra dismissed her attendants, barred the doors, and sank onto the furs by the hearth. Her muscles ached like bruised steel. The taste of blood still clung to her tongue. And yet, it wasn't victory that burned in her veins. It was heat. A strange, coiling heat that had nothing to do with the fire at her feet. Sleep dragged her under like a tide, pulling her into a dream. It began with a sound. A heartbeat. Deep. Slow. Then came the heat, rolling over her in waves, searing her skin, kissing her bones. Fire bled across the darkness, painting it gold. And from the flames, a shadow moved. A man stepped out of the inferno. Tall. Broad. A silhouette carved in molten bronze, power radiating from every line. His hair spilled like black silk over his shoulders, his body inked in runes that pulsed with dragon fire. His eyes, gods, his eyes, gold as burning suns, locked on her with hunger that tasted like prophecy. Her breath hitched. Who? Mine. The words spoken by him, forged into her marrow. He closed the space between them in a heartbeat. Heat rolled off him like sin. His fingers brushed her jaw, hot enough to scorch, gentle enough to undo her. Her wolf didn't fight. It bowed. When his mouth took hers, the kiss burned. Like a claiming. Her knees buckled, and his arms crushed her close, unyielding, possessive, a cage of heat and strength. The world shattered in flames. Nyra woke with a gasp. Her skin was slick with sweat. The furs tangled around her like chains. The rune lights flickered, throwing shadows across the walls that looked like wings. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, still tasting the kiss. And for the first time, the bond with Kael felt like ash compared to the inferno that waited beyond the mountains. Chapter 5. The Mating Ball. The Fey Palace glittered like a jewel carved from moonlight and bone. Columns of living crystal soared into a sky heavy with stars, their facets catching the glow of enchanted lanterns that floated like captive suns. Music pulsed through the air, low, dark, and sinfully sweet, woven by instruments no mortal hand could name. Power hummed in every shadow, in every glance, in every silken whisper that slid through the crowd. The mating ball. It had been centuries since the last one. A night drenched in prophecy and politics, where bonds were forged under divine law, and empires toppled when the wrong hands touched. Tonight, Every unbonded alpha and sovereign stood in the great hall, swathed in wealth and wickedness. Vampires in shadowed velvet, witches trailing smoke and secrets, the tiger lords gleaming in molten silks, and the wolves, predators draped in arrogance, their dominance a storm that clawed the walls. Nyra entered like the silence before lightning. The obsidian doors whispered shut behind her as every head turned. Her gown was midnight black with a slit up to her thigh, embroidered with silver runes that shimmered like stars. The bodice clung to her chest. Her locks, coiled and crowned in moonstone pins, spilled down her back like a river of shadow. No jewels graced her throat. She didn't need them. She wore power like perfume, and when her golden eyes swept the hall, predators lowered their gaze. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind over grave dust. She glided toward the dais where the council sat in their veils of silk and bone. At the edge of the hall, Kael watched her like a starving man, his gray eyes a storm of hunger and hate. He wanted her now, not with tenderness, but with the desperation of a man drowning in his own pride. Nyra didn't spare him a glance. Then suddenly, the doors exploded inward. Heat rolled through the hall in a wave that stole breath and scorched lungs. Shadows writhed against the walls as if alive. And through the smoke, a silhouette emerged, tall and broad. As he stepped into the hall, scales glimmered faintly along his arms, black-edged in molten gold. His hair spilled dark as midnight silk over his shoulders. His face was all ruthless beauty, angles carved by gods with a taste for sin. And his eyes, burned like suns caged in obsidian. The Dragon King had come. Draven. The name slid through the hall like a curse, as well as like a prayer. Some dropped to their knees without meaning to. Others couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. He did not glance at them. His gaze was locked on her. Nyra. Her breath caught. Desire slammed into her like fire flooding her veins. Her wolf clawing at her ribs in a frenzy that tasted like surrender and rage. She stood there shocked, wondering what this feeling was. Draven crossed the hall with the unhurried grace of a predator that feared nothing. The crowd parted as if the air itself fled his path. Magic bled from him, heavy and intoxicating, curling around her like chains of smoke and gold. He stopped a breath away. The silence was almost like a living thing. "Queen Nyra," he said, and the way her name rolled off his tongue was a sin. Deep, velvet dark, threaded with heat that licked places she didn't let anyone touch. Her pulse thundered. She lifted her chin. Dragon King. His mouth curved into a knowing smile. "You wear power well," he murmured, voice brushing her skin like fire. "But power deserves fire beside it." A ripple shuddered through the crowd like the hall itself had exhaled. Nyra smiled slow. "Dangerous. You came to the ball to give lessons in fire?" Draven leaned in, close enough for her to feel the heat bleeding from his skin, for the scent of smoke and storms to curl into her lungs. "No," he said softly. "I came for what's mine." The words cracked like thunder. The floor pulsed under their feet. The runes etched into the marble blazed white-hot, flaring as if the gods themselves had leaned close to listen. Shadows writhed across the walls like serpents of flame. And somewhere in the crush of silence, Kael snarled. Nyra heard it. She didn't look at him. "Is that so?" Her voice slid like silk over steel, each syllable carrying the promise of violence. "Strange. I don't recall belonging to anyone." Draven's gaze swept over her, molten and merciless. It wasn't hunger, not the kind she knew in wolves. This was something deeper. "I'll have to win you then," he said. He extended his hand. The gesture was simple. The meaning was anything but. The Fey musicians, as if moved by some unseen command, coaxed a note from their instruments, a sound like dark water rippling over stone, low and haunting. The melody built slow, winding like smoke, until the hall itself seemed to sway with it. Nyra looked at his hand, then at his eyes. Heat snarled in her veins, warring with pride. Every instinct screamed to deny him, to bare her teeth and remind the world she bent to no one. And yet, something deeper coiled inside her. Something that had been waiting since the dream. She placed her hand in his. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind over a graveyard. Kael's snarl shredded the hush, raw and feral, but no one looked at him. All eyes were on them. Draven led her to the center of the hall. Power bled from him with every step, heat rolling over her skin, searing through silk until it kissed the bone. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a storm-given flesh, like fire that had learned to walk. Nyra moved with him. When his arm slid around her waist, heat branded through the silk of her gown. His other hand claimed hers, strong and sure, drawing her into the rhythm that wasn't really a dance. It was a duel. The crowd faded. The music slowed, then swelled, low and throbbing, threaded with something primal. The beat was a heartbeat. The melody, a prophecy. It licked at her ears, at her blood, until the world was nothing but him. Draven moved with lethal grace, every step a challenge, every shift a question. His hand pressed against the small of her back, pulling her flush against his body, his heat burning through layers of silk until she swore the fabric would ignite. Nyra's breath hitched, only once, before she bared her teeth in a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "You think this wins me?" she murmured, her lips brushing his ear as he spun her so fast the air curled like smoke. "No," his voice slid against her skin, hot as dragon fire. "This shows you what burns for you." His fingers flexed against her waist. Possessive. Promising. Nyra twisted, breaking the hold only to let him catch her wrist mid-turn, dragging her back into his orbit. Her thigh brushed his hip, her chest collided with his. Their mouths hovered, close enough for breath to mingle, for temptation to taste like inevitability. The runes carved into the marble beneath their feet flared. Bright, white-hot. Magic rippled up their legs, licking at their skin, sparking like wildfire where their bodies touched. The prophecy clawed its way into reality, etching flames into the floor with every step they took. Gasps tore through the hall. "They're mates. The runes, gods, it's happening." A whisper from the council dais. "When the dragon bows to the wolf, the world will burn." But Nyra heard none of it. She heard only him, felt only him. The final note struck like a blade. Draven dipped her low, her hair spilling like dark fire across the marble, his golden eyes burning into hers with something raw. When he raised her, their foreheads brushed. And he whispered, "This is only the beginning." The music died on a single note, shattered by a sound that didn't belong in the gilded hall. A snarl. Savage. Broken. The sound of a wolf's soul ripping open. Every head turned. Kael stood at the edge of the marble floor, his chest heaving, his eyes gone silver-white with fury. His aura hit like a blade, raw dominance crashing through the crowd, making lesser wolves drop to their knees. Shadows writhed around him, his beast clawing to the surface, shredding the silk of his jacket, splitting seams. The hall trembled. And then he spoke. "Step away from her." The words were gravel and blood, flung like a gauntlet. His gaze wasn't on Nyra. Not really. It was locked on the dragon standing like a god beside her. Draven turned. Slowly. The firelight coiled over him as he straightened to his full height, power radiating in waves that blistered the air. His golden eyes slid to Kael, and in that single glance, the temperature dropped and soared all at once. Dragons didn't snarl. They didn't posture. They didn't need to. Kael stalked forward, boots hammering the marble. The music's last notes still bled in the air, tangled with whispers like spider silk. "Alpha Kael," Draven murmured, voice smooth as molten gold. "I wondered when your pride would choke you." Kael's lips peeled back in a snarl, fangs flashing under the chandelier's fractured light. You think you can walk in here and lay hands on what's mine? Nyra stiffened. The crowd held its breath. Draven's smile was a slow, cruel thing. What's yours? His gaze slid to Nyra, lingering on the curve of her jaw, the pulse fluttering at her throat. You speak as if she agreed to wear your leash. Kael lunged. Steel flashed in his hand, runes pulsing on the blade, a wolf king's dagger, forged in moonfire and blood oaths. It could cut through dragon hide if it struck true. But it never touched flesh, because Draven moved. Not fast. Not hurried. One moment Kael was mid-stride, fury tearing his mouth open in a snarl. The next, Draven had him by the throat. Heat roared from his skin, blistering the air, curling Kael's hair into smoke. The dagger clattered to the floor, molten at the edges where Draven's fire kissed it. Kael choked, claws ripping at the wrist that held him like iron. Draven's eyes burned brighter, his voice a thunder that shook the hall's bones. Challenge me again, and I'll leave nothing of you for your wolves to bury. The silence was a coffin. Kael writhed once, twice, then stilled, not in surrender, but in fury so raw it bled from his pores. His beast howled inside him, but even that sound died under the weight of the fire coiling from the dragon's skin. Nyra's pulse was a war drum. Her wolf pressed against her ribs, torn between instinct and awe. She should stop this. She should speak. But the words burned in her throat like ash, because deep down, something in her wanted Kael to understand what she already knew. He was not the storm in this room. Draven released him with a flick of his wrist. Kael crashed to the marble, coughing smoke, his pride shredded into bleeding strips. His wolves surged forward, but a single flare of Draven's aura sent them sprawling, whimpering like pups before a wildfire. The Dragon King turned to Nyra, offered his hand. Shall we? The room dared not breathe. Nyra stared at him, heart pounding, and placed her hand in his without breaking eye contact. Together, they walked from the hall as the world burned in silence behind them. Chapter 6. The Trial of Flame. The hall still stank of smoke. Hours had passed since the mating ball detonated into chaos, but whispers still crawled through every corridor of the Fey Palace like serpents. Whispers of fire, of prophecy, of the dragon who had walked into a wolf's night and broken its spine with his bare hands. And now he sat in the council chamber, on the high dais, on a throne that had not been there yesterday. The dragon throne, forged of obsidian and gold, its edges licking with living flame, its presence alone cleaved the balance of power in half. No invitation had been given. No consent had been sought. But Draven did not move like a creature who asked. He moved like a law older than gods. Nyra stood across the chamber, her wolves coiled behind her in shadows of black and steel. She wore her battle leathers again, the runes across her chest glowing faintly under the blood moonlight that spilled through the glass vault above. Her head was high, her face unreadable, but her pulse was a thunder she could not silence. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. Not after the way he had looked at her on that floor. Not after the way Kael's fury had burned and broken in his hands. Not after Draven's words had curled like smoke around her bones. I came for what's mine. The council's voices were a distant hum. Accusations. Demands. Fear dressed as law. You have no right, snarled the Tiger Lord, his golden eyes flashing. Draven didn't look at him. He lounged on his throne like a predator sated but not softened, one arm draped along the molten edge, his golden gaze fixed on the map etched into the floor. Firelight danced across his skin, licking the scars inked in runes down his arms. No right. His voice was silk stretched over steel. You mistake permission for power. The room shuddered under those words. And then the elder Fey rose, her bone-white hair spilling like frost down her back. Enough. The final trial begins. The chamber stilled. Nyra's wolf prowled beneath her skin. The third trial. Flame. The arena lay beyond the mountain's heart, carved from volcanic stone and veined with molten rivers that hissed and spat fire into the air. The heat hit like a blow as Nyra stepped through the archway, her leathers slick against her skin, her throat parched. She had expected steel. Claws. Teeth. Not this. The floor was fire. Not illusion. Not controlled. True flame, alive and writhing like serpents, coiling across black rock that cracked under her boots. Above, the blood moon glared like an open wound, bleeding crimson light onto the inferno below. The elder's voice rolled over the roar of heat. The trial of flame will decide the worth of your soul. Survive it, and you shall ascend. Nyra's jaw tightened. She would not burn. The moment the horn split the air, the world became fire. Walls of it, rivers of it, coiling, spitting, chasing her like living beasts. Heat seared her lungs raw, kissed her skin until blisters screamed across her arms. Her wolf clawed inside her, but even shifting would not save her here. This was not a trial of strength. It was surrender. The flames whispered as they licked her boots, as they curled up her legs, as they breathed against her throat. Yield. 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 Nyra bared her teeth and ran. Through firestorms that swallowed the path. Across stone that shattered under molten veins. Her muscles screamed. Her breath came in knives. And still she moved, because she had never been prey. Not to men. Not to gods. Not to fire. A pillar of flame roared to life before her, a wall taller than any fortress. She skidded to a halt, heat blistering her cheeks, and something inside her cracked. Not with fear. With fury. I don't yield, she snarled and leapt through. Agony kissed every nerve. Fire clawed down her spine, seared her lungs, ate her breath whole. And then, darkness. When she woke, cool stone pressed against her skin. Nyra's eyes fluttered open to a ceiling etched in runes that glowed like embers. The heat was gone, but the scent of smoke clung to her hair, her skin, her very soul. She pushed up on trembling arms and froze. He was there. Draven. Sitting in the shadows, a shape carved from fire and night, his golden eyes fixed on her like suns chained in darkness. Power rolled from him in slow waves, licking her skin until it prickled. You should be ash, he said softly. Not mocking. Almost reverent. Nyra's throat scraped raw words. And yet, here I am. His mouth curved, slow and lethal. Because you burn too. Her pulse stuttered. He rose. Every inch of him was devastating. Shoulders broad enough to bear kingdoms, muscle wrapped in black-scaled leather, hair spilling in midnight rivers. He moved like heat given flesh, until the shadows bent around him and she could taste his breath. Tell me, wolf, he murmured, his voice brushing her skin like smoke. When you leapt through the fire, what did you see? Nyra swallowed hard. Nothing. Liar. The word ghosted over her mouth, close enough for heat to bleed across her lips, for want to twist like a blade in her gut. Her wolf clawed at her ribs, snarling for him. For this. She hated it. She wanted it. Draven lifted his hand, slow, deliberate, and brushed his thumb along her jaw. A whisper of heat. Enough to sear her bones. Her breath broke. He leaned in, his lips a breath from hers. The air crackled like lightning trapped in a kiss that hadn't yet happened. And then he stepped back. You're not ready, he said, his voice a blade sliding back into its sheath. But you will be. He turned, his cloak slicing shadows as he walked away, the door hissing shut behind him. Nyra sat frozen, her pulse a wildfire, her skin burning where his touch lingered. And for the first time in her life, victory didn't feel like enough. Chapter 7. When Fire Claims the Throne. The council chamber burned with whispers. Nyra strode through the towering arch of obsidian and bone, her boots echoing like war drums against the polished stone. The chamber was carved from the mountain's heart, veins of molten gold threading the walls, pulsing faintly like a beast asleep. High above, chandeliers bled silver fire, their flames twisting in shapes that might have been serpents. Every throne was filled. Every alpha, sovereign, and elder seated in rigid silence as her shadow cut across the floor. Whispers crawled like smoke behind her back, about the trial, about the flames, about the wolf who should have been ash but walked out wearing fire like a crown. And about the dragon who waited. Draven sat at the far end of the chamber. Not on the dais. On the dragon throne. He had claimed it yesterday like a god claims sky, without permission, without question, without care for the order of the world. And now it burned beneath him, carved of black obsidian veined with molten gold, its edges licking with flame that didn't consume but devoured the air itself. He didn't rise when she entered. He didn't need to. Those golden eyes found her, molten and merciless, and the breath in her lungs turned to smoke. Queen Nyra. The elder Fae's voice cracked like old bone. You survived the trial of flame. Did you doubt I would? Her voice slid through the chamber like a blade in silk. She mounted the dais step by step, her body a map of new scars, her leathers charred and clinging like a second skin. Her hair hung in dark coils down her back, streaked faintly with soot and, gods help her, ash-gold shimmer where fire had kissed it. The whispers thickened. Some awe. Some fear. Kael sat 2 thrones down, his jaw locked, his fists clenched so tight blood seeped from his claws. His aura crashed in waves, raw dominance thick with rage and something that reeked of desperation. His wolf bled through his skin, his eyes gleaming silver white. Draven watched him like one watches a dying flame. Nyra. Kael's voice cracked the silence. He rose, his shadow spilling across the floor like a blade. Come. With me. The words weren't a request. They were a command. And they broke something inside her. Slowly, Nyra turned to face him. The hall stilled. Her gaze was molten steel, her voice a quiet storm. No. The sound Kael made wasn't human. He moved before anyone could stop him, crossing the floor in a blur, claws flashing, fury tearing from his throat. His hands closed on her shoulders, yanking her close enough for his breath to scorch her cheek. You're mine, he snarled, his voice breaking like a chain pulled too tight. You are mine. Her wolf rose like a hurricane. Her claws kissed his throat before thought could catch breath. She slammed him back against the marble pillar hard enough to crack the stone, her golden eyes blazing, her voice a blade dripping blood. I was yours, she hissed, until you threw me away. His gaze flicked, just once, past her shoulder, to the dragon who had not moved. Not a muscle. Not a breath. And yet power roared off Draven in waves that blistered the air, flames writhing like serpents around his throne. His gaze burned through the distance, molten and merciless, locked on Kael like judgment incarnate. Kael's hands fell from her shoulders. Nyra stepped back slowly, her claws dripping crimson from where they'd grazed his skin. The scent of his blood curled like smoke. Go, she said softly. Kael choked on the words clawing up his throat. His pride, his bond, his very soul writhed under the weight of what stood before him. Not the woman he had dismissed, but a queen. The storm. Nyra was a bit confused. Why is the bond still lingering on Kael? It disappeared for her the night of the mating ball, but Kael is still behaving as if they are still connected. This, she thought, could not end well. Chapter 8. When fire takes what burns. The war chamber was carved from living obsidian, the walls veined with molten light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Maps sprawled across the great table, realms etched in silver and flame, but Nyra saw none of it. She stood at the far end, braced against the cold stone, breath sawing sharp through her teeth. The chamber was empty, except for the scent. smoke and heat, coiling through the air like a living thing, curling against her skin, sliding down her spine until her muscles trembled with the memory of the ballroom, of the trial of flame, of the prophecy carved into the marble at her feet. She gripped the edge of the table harder, claws slicing grooves into the stone. The door shut behind her with a soft click. The air thickened. Her wolf went still. And then she felt him. Power rolled through the chamber like a tide, dark and molten, kissing every shadow, bleeding heat into her bones until she swore her blood boiled. She turned slowly, her breath a fragile thread in her throat. Draven stood in the doorway. No crown. No armor. Just black-scaled leather clinging to a body built for ruin, every line carved in shadow and fire. His hair spilled like midnight down his back, his golden eyes glowing like caged suns in the dim. He didn't speak. The silence said everything. Nyra straightened, forcing steel into her spine even as her pulse clawed for escape. "What do you want, Draven?" The smile that touched his mouth was a sin, slow, dark, and sharp enough to bleed. He moved toward her, each step unhurried, deliberate, until the molten veins in the floor flared brighter with his heat. "You." His voice was low, a rasp of velvet over embers. "The way I've wanted since the first time you burned in my dreams." Her breath hitched. She hated it. Hated him for hearing it. "You think this is a game?" She spat, her claws biting deeper into the stone. "That you can just walk in and—" His hand slammed down on the table beside hers, molten power searing the obsidian where his palms struck. The flames etched in the walls writhed like serpents as he leaned in, his body a wall of heat, his mouth a breath from hers. "I don't play games, Wolf." His words ghosted over her lips, fire threaded through every syllable. Her wolf howled, wild and wanting. Nyra bared her teeth. "And if I bite?" Draven's laugh was soft. "Lethal. Then bite, little queen. See if I bleed." She didn't think. She moved. Her claws fisted in his hair, dragging his mouth to hers with a snarl that tasted like war. The kiss was not soft. Teeth clashing, tongues tangling, heat crashing like wildfire through a forest of bone and blood. Draven groaned into her mouth, a deep, rough sound that shook the air, as his hands claimed her waist, dragging her flush against the hard planes of his body. She gasped when her spine hit the table, the maps scattering like fallen kingdoms. His mouth devoured hers, fierce and unyielding, his taste smoke and storm and sin. Every stroke of his tongue was a promise. Every crush of his lips was a claim. Her legs wrapped around his hips without thought, instinct clawing past reason, dragging him closer until she could feel the heat of him through leather and silk, a heat that could burn worlds. "Draven," his name broke on her lips as his mouth tore down her throat, teeth grazing the curve where pulse met skin. Fire kissed every inch he touched, branding her, owning her in ways no bond mark ever had. He growled against her skin. "Say it." Her nails raked his shoulders. "Say what?" "That you want me." Her wolf writhed, snarling and surrendering in the same breath. Pride clung like ash in her throat. She didn't answer. She bit him instead. Her teeth sank into the hard line of his jaw, and his roar split the chamber, a sound that wasn't human, wasn't safe, was dragon in all its glory. His hand fisted in her hair, yanking her head back, and his mouth crashed onto hers again, bruising, brutal, beautiful. The table cracked beneath them. Maps caught fire. The world was heat and teeth and prophecy clawing at her skin. And then he stopped, breath ragged, eyes molten, his forehead pressed to hers like a vow. "You're not ready," he rasped, the words breaking like chains. "Not yet." Her breath shattered. "Then why?" "Because when I take you—" His mouth brushed her ear, his voice a growl of fire and hunger. "There will be no going back." And then he was gone. Just gone. The door slammed like a heartbeat breaking, and Nyra was left shaking on the ruins of the war table, her lips swollen, her skin scorched, her wolf howling for more. And gods help her. She already knew she would burn. Chapter 9. The Alpha's Last Sin. The storm broke at midnight. Nyra stood on the balcony carved into the mountain spine, the world spilling in molten rivers below, her pulse still thrumming with the ghost of his mouth, his hands, his fire. Draven. Every breath tasted like him. Every heartbeat burned his name through her veins. And gods help her. She hated how much she wanted him. Hated that the kiss hadn't sated the hunger, it had sharpened it, cut her open and left her bleeding want across the stars. The door behind her creaked. Her wolf stiffened. Nyra! Kael's voice was a low snarl, scraping the edges of something feral. She turned slowly, her claws itching for blood. He looked nothing like the alpha who had once sneered at her curves, who had dismissed her worth with a glance and a cruel word. That man was gone, burned to bone and ash. What stood before her was a storm with no sky, pride rotted into desperation, dominance broken and bleeding. And gods, he reeked of it. "Leave," she said flatly. He stepped closer. "You think he'll save you?" His mouth curled, bitter as poison. "You think a dragon will love a wolf? He'll burn you, Nyra. When he's done, when he's taken what he wants, there'll be nothing left but ash." She bared her teeth. Better ash than chains. The blow landed like a blade. Kael flinched, just once, before rage swallowed the wound. His aura crashed against hers, raw and ugly, pressing like a storm clawing for surrender. He stepped closer. "You think he'll save you?" His mouth curled, bitter as poison. "You think a dragon will love a wolf? He'll burn you, Nyra. When he's done, when he's taken what he wants, there'll be nothing left but ash." She bared her teeth. Better ash than chains. The blow landed like a blade. Kael flinched, just once, before rage swallowed the wound. His aura crashed against hers, raw and ugly, pressing like a storm clawing for surrender. Magic bled in the air where he vanished, dark and foul, nothing like the wild song of wolves. It slithered like smoke from a corpse fire, curling with whispers that made her wolf snarl in warning. Nyra gripped the stone rail, claws carving deep. Kael wasn't gone. He was gone wrong. Far from the mountain, beneath the roots of the dead forest, Kael knelt in a cavern where no sun had touched since the first war of gods. The walls dripped with rot. The air stank of grave dust and old magic. And before him, coiled in shadow, something ancient stirred. "You call me little wolf," the voice rasped, sliding like oil across his skin. "You beg for teeth to tear prophecy's throat." Kael lifted his head, silver eyes gleaming with hate. "I want the dragon dead." Laughter slithered from the dark, cold and endless. "Then give me blood." The blade flashed. Kael didn't hesitate. He sliced his palm, let the blood drip into the black pool where the voice slept. The water hissed, boiling, drinking deep. The cavern shook as runes crawled across the stone like spiders of fire and bone. The voice purred. "You've given me your blood. Now, give me your soul." Kael bared his teeth. "Take it." The shadows exploded. And when they cleared, Kael rose, taller, harder, a crown of bone curling from his skull, his aura bleeding rot and ruin. Not Alpha. Not Wolf. Something worse. The Forsaken King. Back at the war table. Nyra slammed her fists into the stone, the war chamber trembling under the weight of her fury. "He's gone to the Forsaken," she snarled, the taste of the name like poison in her mouth. Draven stood across the table, his eyes burning like suns caught in storm. "Then the war begins sooner than I thought." Her gaze cut to him, molten gold clashing with molten fire. "This is because of you." No, his voice was calm. Too calm. This is because of him. Because weakness can't bear the weight of prophecy. Her wolf lunged at the words. Her pride howled. She wanted to rip his throat. She wanted to kiss him until the world bled. She did neither. Then we kill him, she said, voice sharp as shattered steel. Draven's mouth curved, a slow, dangerous thing. Oh, little wolf. We don't kill him. Her pulse stumbled. Then what? We burn him. Chapter 10. The Bond in Blood and Fire. The world was burning. The mountain skies split with war cries and wings, dragons carving arcs of fire through the night, while wolves tore across the blackened earth in storms of fang and fury. The air reeked of ash, blood, and magic so heavy it cracked the bones of the earth. Nyra moved through the carnage like a blade. Her wolf strength sang in her muscles, her claws slick with blood that steamed against the heat pouring from the battlefield. Her leathers were scorched and torn, her hair a wild crown of smoke and moonlight, her eyes blazing molten gold. But for every enemy she cut down, another rose. The Forsaken had come. Kael led them. Not a wolf now, something else. Something carved from ruin and hate, his body a lattice of bone and shadow, his aura a void that drank light. His wolves crawled with rot, their eyes pits of white fire, their howls splitting the sky like knives. Nyra's breath hitched as his gaze speared her through the chaos. You could have been my queen, he roared, his voice carrying like thunder over a corpse sea. Instead, you'll burn with him. And then he charged. Nyra shifted in a blink, fur and fang exploding from flesh, her wolf a storm of midnight and gold. She met him head-on, their clash a quake that split stone, claws carving sparks, fangs sinking deep. His magic slammed into her like a black tide, choking her lungs, burning her veins. She fought anyway, because behind her, she felt him. The sky split. Fire roared. Draven fell like judgment. Wings unfurled behind him in a storm of shadow and flame, spanning the battlefield, blotting out the moon. His scales burned black gold, his eyes twin suns, his roar shattering the marrow of the world. Dragons followed him, an army of fire and fury, but she barely saw them. She saw him. Draven hit the earth like a god of war, his blade a scythe of living fire, his aura scorching the breath from lungs. Enemies melted in his wake, screams ripped from throats as the ground itself burned beneath his boots. And then he was beside her. Back to back. Wolf and dragon. Fang and flame. Prophecy given flesh. Nyra tore through a forsaken beast, her breath ragged, her body slick with blood and heat. Draven moved like fire incarnate, his sword cleaving bone, his free hand flinging walls of flame that turned the dead to ash. They fought fiercely side by side, a prophecy being fulfilled through them. Wolf and dragon. Fang and fire. Crown of ash. Throne of flame. At the end, the battlefield was ash. The Forsaken were gone. Their bodies smoldered in pits of molten rock where Draven's fire had torn the earth apart, their screams still echoing in the cracks of stone. Wolves roamed the ruins, bloodied but unbroken, howls mourning the dead and singing victory to the crimson sky. And Kael. Kael knelt in chains. What was left of him? His flesh hung in tatters over bone etched in runes of rot, his crown of bone shattered, his aura a ragged shadow bleeding from the cracks in his soul. They had dragged him to the obsidian dais at the mountain's heart, where the council had gathered in silence broken only by the hiss of flame. Nyra stood before him. In black and gold, the gown a molten river hugging every curve, firelight flickering across her dark skin, her braids crowned in a circlet of flame-forged gold. Her eyes burned molten as she looked down at the Alpha who had once called her unworthy. Kael's howl ripped through the chamber as Draven stepped from the shadows, his hand blazing with molten fire. No sword. No ritual. Just flame. He looked at Nyra, his golden eyes asking a question without words. She nodded once. The dragon closed his hand. Kael burned. No scream. No ash left behind. Only silence, and the taste of prophecy fulfilled. "Little queen," he growled when they were alone, his voice a furnace in her ear. "Ready to burn?" His mouth devoured hers before she could speak, smoke curling from his lips as heat seared her skin, branding her, claiming her. Her nails raked his shoulders, her legs locking around his hips as he lifted her like she weighed nothing. The bond snapped. Draven tore his mouth from hers, his breath a storm, his voice a growl that shook the bones of the world. "Mine!" Nyra bared her teeth, her lips swollen from his kiss, her eyes blazing like suns. His mouth claimed hers like a storm devouring a forest, heat roaring through her veins until her thoughts burned to ash. Nyra gasped into his kiss as his tongue swept deep, demanding, tasting, conquering. She bit him because she could, because she wanted to, and he groaned into her mouth, low and dark, a sound that made her wolf claw and howl for more. "Say it!" he rasped against her lips, his breath molten. "Say you're mine." Her nails raked his shoulders, sparks leaping where claw met scale. "Make me," she snarled. Then his mouth crashed down her throat, teeth marking her before his tongue soothed the sting, fire following every touch. And he proceeded to make her scream that she was his until her throat was raw. The coronation of fire and fang. The dais was reborn in flame. Obsidian steps glowed molten under the weight of power as the crowns of wolf and dragon merged. Gold and black, fire and fang, fused into a single circlet that hissed like a living thing. Draven stood at her side, towering, terrible, beautiful, his armor dripping molten gold, his eyes two suns devouring the dark. When he spoke, the words carved themselves into the bones of the mountain. "Behold your queen," he thundered. "Nyra of Shadowfang, queen of wolves, queen of flame, my mate, my equal, my fury." The world roared its submission. And then, quiet, because when his hand slid to her waist, when he bent his head and claimed her mouth in front of every soul that drew breath, they all knew this wasn't politics. This wasn't ceremony. This was prophecy made flesh. And God's help anyone who defied it. Later. The throne room was empty now, save for the flicker of firelight and the whisper of silk pooling on black stone. Nyra stood before the throne, her crown cast aside, her breath a slow tremor. Draven came to her without sound. Always like a storm before the break. Always inevitable. His hands slid around her waist, pulling her back against a chest carved from war, his mouth grazing the curve of her neck. "You wore the crown well, little queen," he murmured, heat ghosting her skin. She smiled, a sharp, wicked thing, as she turned in his arms and pressed her mouth to his. "Now show me how a king treasures her queen." And when he did, on black stone, under the light of their flames, the world outside burned with the promise of a new age. Fire and fang. Blood and crown. Queen and king. Forever bound. Thank you for listening to today's story. Like and subscribe for more stories like this one.